Until the mid-1790s, Kenwood House, originally built around 1605 for John Bill, the King's printer, and rebuilt in 1700, was a large villa looking directly onto Hampstead Lane, whose course followed that of the Hornsey and St. Pancras parish boundary. The house and immediate estate were purchased by William Murray, 1st Earl of Mansfield in 1755. The lease of Hornsey in Finchley Woods by the Bishop of London to the Earl of Mansfield in 1820 was a renewal of leases originally taken out in 1755 after Mansfield acquired Kenwood. The plan shows the extent of the lands, which were then only partly forested. The income from the woods and lands was intended for the upkeep of the house, gardens, and parkland of Kenwood. These leases were the first steps toward converting a large suburban villa into a miniature landed estate such as Chatsworth or Woburn. In the 1790s, the second Earl added the dining room, music room wings, the kitchen wing, the stable wing, and the kitchen garden. This detail from a map of the second Earl of Mansfield Kenwood Estate in 1794 shows the proposed diversion of Hampstead Lane away from its original course running in front of the house on the left to its current course on the right. It was the second stage in the transformation of the Kenwood Estate. What is now Northwood, still owned by the Bishop of London, is now included in the estate. This annotated extract from John Rock's 1754 map of Middlesex shows the park owned and occupied by the Earls of Mansfield in gold, surrounded by the leased and freehold lands in Finchley and Hornsey to the north, and St. Pancras west, east, and south. The wider estate also ensured that the environs of the park were kept green and undeveloped. This map shows the situation between 1840 and 1884. This 1884 ordinance map of Hornsey and Finchley is annotated to show the Ecclesiastical Commissioner's plan for the urban development of the district. In 1884, the commissioners terminated the Mansfield leases in Hornsey and Finchley. In return, the fourth Earl received the freehold of Northwood and £25,000. This was invested with the income replacing the rents from the Hornsey and Finchley estates. The Ecclesiastical Commissioners eventually recouped the $25,000 by selling what is now Queen's Wood to Hornsey in 1898. Encouraged by this deal, in 1889 the Earl sold his lands extending to Gospel Oak to the London County Council. The income from the invested sum he received went towards the maintenance of the park, which remained in his hands. This extended from Hampstead Lane to the path from the boating pond to Flask Walk in Hampstead. This print from the 1786 European magazine shows the house and its new Adam Library viewed from what was then the fence separating Hampstead and St. Pancras parishes. Shortly afterwards, the third Lord Mansfield acquired the neighbouring estate stretching to Hampstead Lane next to Spaniard's Inn. The fence, though not the boundary oaks, disappeared, and in its place a wide path which still exists was created. This was part of a circuit round the estate intended for visitors, containing picturesque views of house and estate. The meadow in the foreground was the heart of the model farm that was created in the early 1790s. The large house with the portico in the distance is the villa of Lord Southampton, approximately on the site of Beechwood. Its estate was to be purchased by the then Lord Mansfield in 1840. In this 1850s painting by Frederick Waters Watt, The View from Hampstead Heath towards Kenwood, one can see the fence separating Hampstead Heath proper from the Kenwood estate. In the foreground is the sand and gravel quarry opened by Sir Thomas Marion Wilson, the lord of the manor of Hampstead after 1830. This still survives as a football pitch. The fence, following the line of the Hampstead and St. Pancras parish boundary, extended to the tumulus, which the Mansfields added for scenic purposes. St. Michael's Church in Highgate is not actually visible from this viewpoint. It can only be seen from the crest of the hill beyond the football pitch. From the early 18th century, the tumulus became a much-visited antiquarian site. Controversy continues to rage as to whether it is actually a prehistoric burial ground, maybe of Queen Boadicea, or merely the foundation mound for a 17th century windmill. Majority scholarly opinion today accepts that it is a burial mound, and it is listed as such by Historic England. The Hampstead Water Company, which had created the Highgate ponds in the 1690s, decided to sell off the fields surrounding the ponds, while retaining the ponds themselves. The blurb mentions that the beautiful elevated situation of this estate happily ranks it above all others around London as the place where the gentleman and builder may exercise their taste in the erection of villas. Lord Mansfield, however, stepped in and purchased the land and retained it as open space, adding it to the Gospel Oak land to its south. John Prickett's 1803 map of Kenwood Estate distinguishes between the 133 acres in hand and owned and occupied by the Earl of Mansfield, and the remaining 229 acres now forming part of Hampstead Heath that were leased to the Hampstead Water Company and individuals. A view of about 1794 showing the approaches to Kenwood House from Millfield Lane, Highgate. Note the fence along the Highgate to Hampstead path, marking the southern border of Kenwood Park. Even then, many trees would have had to have been cut down to obtain this view of the house, and the drawing may be connected with the second Earl's commission to Humphrey Repton to re-landscape the grounds surrounding Kenwood. This view from 1780, drawn by Robertson and engraved by Daniel Lapierre, was taken from just in front of what is now Kenwood Stable Block, and is little changed to this day. Note the picturesque farm workers. In the early 1790s, the second Countess, who'd been friendly with Queen Marie Antoinette, was responsible for creating Kenwood Farmhouse, of which only the main building now survives, and the Swiss chalet-style dairy. While picturesque and appropriate for small social gatherings, the little model farm was run on the latest scientific principles. In this 1840 sale plan of the Fitzroy Farm and Highgate Estate Plan, note the proposed roads and sites for villas. This land, to the east of Millfield Lane, lay immediately next to Kenwood House. It was purchased by the third Earl in order to retain the rural environment of the house. Thanks to the energetic action by Arthur Crossfield of Whittenhurst Highgate and his allies in the early 1920s, this land and most of Kenwood Park was to be added to Hampstead Heath. The cartoon was published following the People's Budget of 1909, which introduced unprecedented taxes on the lands and incomes of Britain's wealthiest families. These made it impossible to maintain the Kenwood estate from investment income. After 1907, the family had hardly left their Scottish estate at Scone Palace and had begun letting out Kenwood, most notably to the Russian Grand Duke Michael. It was a relatively easy decision to sell the estate, initially for building. The First World War, however, delayed the sale until the early 1920s.